Minutes before 7. Very interesting discussion coming your way now. South Africa is heading towards the elections, and one of the issues shrouding this period is political party funding. In South Africa, parties are allocated limited public funds through the proportional representation electoral system and are required to account for this expenditure. Now, interestingly, Phosa, the former ANC Secretary General, called for legislation that could significantly increase financial support for political parties, but also, for the first time, force parties to reveal their sources of private funding. Now we are joined by Judith February from our SABC studios in Parliament. Judith is with the Human Science Research Council. Good morning to you, Judith. It's great to have you.
Morning, Leanne.
Themba Godi is also joining us. Now, he is in our Pretoria studio. He is the leader of the African People's Convention. Themba, good morning to you.
Morning.
And here in the Johannesburg studio, sitting right next to me, I've got Dr. Dion George. He is the chairperson of the DA's Federal Council. Good to have you. Welcome to Morning Live, Dion. It's lovely to have you as a guest.
Good morning. Thanks for inviting me.
All right. We did invite a representative of the ANC, but unfortunately, they were unable to make it for this particular discussion. Judith, let me begin this discussion with a question to you. You've written extensively on this subject. What does the law say about political party funding in our country?
Well, Leanne, as you pointed out in your introduction, what we have in South Africa is only legislation which deals with the public funding of political parties. That is an amount of money which is taken from the public purse in terms of the public funding of Represented Parties Act of 1997. And that money is divided amongst parties who are already in Parliament, 90% of that proportionately and 10% of that equitably. And parties have to account for that. But where there is a gap in the law is that there is absolutely no regulation of private money to political parties. And hence we see so many instances in the past of corruption and so on, where political parties have received money without accounting for it, and that has often led to instances of corruption. And one of the things that many of us have been advocating for since 1997 and after that is that there has to be some regulation of private money to political parties, failing which we will have what we have at the moment, which is a laissez-faire situation where parties are able to collect as much money and raise as much money as they want without being accountable. Now, Leanne, why is this important? It's important because we live in a society which is highly unequal, and where you have certain individuals who are able to buy influence because of the donations that they give to political parties, that drowns out the voices of the poor and allows wealthy, connected individuals to have an impact on policy, which is obviously highly undesirable. And that is what legislation would go some way to deal with.
Okay. Let's now go to Themba. Themba, you're in the Pretoria studio. Let's get your view on this just to open up the discussion. How do you feel about this particular issue?
No, indeed, Leanne, I do agree that to level the playing field, we need to enhance public funding of political parties to avoid, our democracy being subverted. I do remember that in a meeting of political parties in Parliament with the Deputy President of the country, this issue was discussed, and there was agreement that there is need for Parliament to look at how parties can be funded publicly. But it appears that that discussion floundered in the office of the Chief Whip of the majority party, which could have gone a long way in ensuring that there is transparency and there's equity in the funding of parties.
Yeah. All right. Now, the DA's turn. In terms of party funding, there seems to be a perception out there that there's some secrecy around the party funding. That if parties are not keen to declare who it is, they might lose funding, or things might go wrong in order to keep it rather a secret, and who funds us is our business and nobody else's business. On the DA's side, just tell us your perception. Where do you stand?
Well, Ms. February mentioned the context, and I think that that's something we need to take into consideration. Missing in this debate is the voice of the donor. Now, the donor's voice is saying, I want to contribute to democracy, deepening democracy in South Africa. Now, remember, donors are individuals and organizations that pay money over to political parties. And at the moment in South Africa, there is concern from donors to the DA who feel that if their names were to be published on a list for public consumption, that it might very well impact on the ability to do business with government, to perhaps get jobs, certain jobs in government and other jobs. So there is concern from the donor's perspective, and I think that has to be taken into consideration. We also have to look at the issue of how do you actually hold political parties to account. Now, I chair the DA's Federal Finance Committee, and we do have a self-regulatory process in the party where we ensure that we know our customers, so we know exactly where the money is coming from. We know that it is not the proceeds of criminal activity or terrorism, and also we make sure that we have mechanisms in place to ensure that where we govern, we do not create an opportunity for influence to be brought by a donor on the DA. So we do have those self-regulatory mechanisms in place. Having said that, we do believe that there will come a time when our democracy will be ready for total transparency, but we don't believe that time is now. There will be a time when people don't feel uncomfortable about publicly declaring where they are putting their money to support a political party. So I think that context must be taken into consideration, and I think that is something that hasn't necessarily been aired well enough in this process.
Okay. Judith, back in 2005, the Cape High Court dismissed IDAS's application to gain access to South Africa's biggest party funders. How far have we come since then?
Well, Leanne, sadly, we haven't come very far at all. In 2005, the reason why our court case, and I was at IDASA then, was dismissed was because the court found that political parties are private bodies, and therefore the information that they have regarding their donations is a matter for them and not for the public. We decided not to appeal the case simply because the ANC Secretary General at the time, Kgalema Motlanthe, had gone on record as saying this is a matter for Parliament. Parliament should deal with this matter. Well, here we are in 2013, and Parliament has done nothing to deal with this matter. Interestingly enough, this is something on which all the political parties agree, that aside from the UDM and others, that they don't want to reveal their sources of funding. So sadly, despite Matthew's Phosa's leanings around more public funding, and I think that is it's one route, but of course public funding will never be enough to deal with the costs of elections, which in South Africa are very high. But I'd like to come back to something that Dr. George said. This is an argument that we have heard and that I've heard over the years in our research, that opposition parties believe that the environment out there is so polarized that transparency will damage their ability to raise money. Yeah. Well, in 2004, when I was at IDASA, we managed to get a number of companies to come out and be transparent about their donations. And that, in fact, brought money into various opposition parties which they might not have received. So I think we're talking here about the swings and roundabouts. And, maybe one loses one or two dodgy donors who want to have influence and so on. But at the same time, you might gain certain donors. And I think in our research, many of the people we spoke to were tired of a situation where there was no transparency, because that creates an environment which is ripe for corruption, the tenderpreneurship that we're seeing, which so bedevils our democracy. Yeah. And self-regulation, frankly, is also what the ANC have said. They've said to us, we will disclose, but to our party. That's simply not good enough. The Constitution is clear about the public's right to know and our rights of transparency and accountability.
Yeah, all right. Interesting comments that you've made. We're going to pick this up. Before we take an ad break, I'm just going to ask Themba this final question in this segment. We're going to continue this discussion after the break. Temba, your party, you were actually formed on this day, the 5th of September, 2007. So you've been around for, what, about 6 years now.
Sure.
How's funding for you? I mean, you're not a massive party. You're not, let's say, you're not the ANC. You're not the DA.
True.
How difficult is it for you to get funding? What do funders get from you?
Well, it is indeed a nightmare, and we hardly have any funding. I must say that the advantages of disclosure for me far outweigh the perceived disadvantages, because there are companies that do make donations to all parties in parliament using whatever formula that they have decided upon, and I think we need to build on that and put the pressure for more and more companies to be transparent and to make a contribution. I think the challenge is when companies and wealthy individuals decide that we're going to fund only one party, and that is where the secrecy come in. And if we're going to 20 years down the line still want to perpetuate non-transparency and secrecy, I think that's where you have all manner of imaginations that might creep into the process. All
right, Temba, all my guests are staying. We're going to take a break here on Morning Live. And one of the issues I want to look at when we return after this is when funders do give money, you know, some people give it out of goodwill, but others have hidden agendas. And those turned out to be a bit of a problem. So that's something we'll discuss after the break. You know you can contribute to this conversation as well. Would love to hear from you and bring up a couple of the issues at play. Stay tuned. We'll have more after this.